grandparents. I miss my uncles. I miss my aunts.
The investigators learned that Topalian had traveled the country repeating the story about his ancestors, raising millions of dollars to promote awareness of Armenia and its people's plight. He also took his case to Washington, lobbying Congress and top officials throughout the government. He was very successful, not only in gaining their sympathy and understanding, he had a hand in helping make Armenia one of the largest per capita recipients of U.S. foreign aid.
We knew we were dealing with somebody that just wasn't your average guy off the streets.
The man who Pete Elliott first thought was just a convenience store owner named Moose was turning out to be a man with friends in some very high places.
Federal agent Pete Elliott has spent months searching for the person who left 100 pounds of volatile explosives in a small-town storage locker. He's traced the lethal stash to a man who once owned a local convenience store. But digging deeper, Agent Elliott has learned the man whose nickname was Moose has some extraordinary connections to an underground terror network and to the nation's highest corridors of power. Here again, John Hockenberry.
As Pete Elliott listened to that breakfast meeting between Murad Topalian and his former wife Lucy, it became clear that Topalian was a man with powerful connections. According to ATF transcripts of the conversation, Murad told Lucy he was supposed to be somewhere far more important than the Bob Evans restaurant in Cleveland.
He said he was supposed to be in the White House that day. We started to find out who Murad Topalian was that day.
For instance, that Topalian was no stranger to Bill Clinton's White House. He had visited the White House complex nearly 24 times between 1993 and 1996, according to government records. He attended at least 2 gatherings with Mr. Clinton himself. At one meeting, he sat just 1 chair away from the president.
Did you ever figure he was too big of a fish, that he'd get away, that he'd somehow undermine your efforts? This is a guy who visited the White House more than once.
Right.
A lot more than once.
Right. I was concerned. I was definitely concerned. I was told by witnesses during this case that they were told by him that I was going to be transferred during this case, that there was no case against him, that this case was a farce and was not going to be going anywhere.
Topalian's resume looked squeaky clean, above reproach. He was a lecturer at the State Department, someone who had testified before Congress, an upstanding vice president of a community college. But Pete Elliott was convinced there was another side to Murad Topalian.
I'm seeing somebody saying to himself, "You're coming down, buddy. I don't care how long it takes."
If he's guilty, he's coming down, correct.
Murad Topalian, a man with powerful allies, versus Pete Elliott, an unheralded middleman at the beleaguered ATF. But to Elliott, this was an opportunity. He would prove his own investigative skills and help repair the reputation of the ATF, stinging from high-profile debacles at Ruby Ridge and Waco.
You made a vow that this case was not going to turn out like some others.
Right. Last thing I wanted was to, not prove this case and have the media and have everybody else looking at this thing and saying, well, the ATF should have never been involved. I haven't forgotten anything after Waco happened and how low our morale was.
But at this moment, in the fall of '96, you're carrying the flag for the whole agency for a minute or two.
I felt that way.
It's amazing that all these objects here tell a story.
Everything left behind something, some type of clue.
But would those clues provide the answer to 2 key questions? Why would a prominent person like Murad Topalian have a locker full of explosives and guns? And what connection might the locker have with Armenia? Remember what Topalian had told his former wife on that hidden camera tape.
I didn't know what was in there.
We had an obstacle on our hands. We had to show somebody had knowledge of the inside contents of that storage unit to make it a prosecutable case.
Clearly 100 pounds of dynamite would not be easy to overlook if it were stacked in boxes inside a small locker, nor would the danger it posed be easily ignored. We asked the ATF to show us how much damage 100 pounds of dynamite could do. Notice how careful these experienced people are. Then remember that the dynamite inside the locker had begun to crystallize and had become highly unstable. Pete Elliott knew the danger, and he was determined to find out who had left the explosives behind. Although the original dynamite inside the locker had been destroyed, Elliott had kept the boxes, which still had on them something called the shift date code. The code acts as a kind of fingerprint, allowing the explosives to be tracked to the manufacturer. ATF records showed this particular dynamite had been stolen in 1976 from a construction site in Michigan. Nearly 2 decades had passed and the case was never solved. Poring through the case file, Elliot found one of the prime suspects. But would he talk?
It's all how you ask questions and present questions. I ask everybody right off the bat, do you believe in God? Do you believe that there's a purpose for everything? And boom, he did the right thing.
And a secret locked away for years becomes another piece in Pete Elliott's emerging puzzle. The man said he'd been hired in 1976 by Murad Topalian to acquire the explosives and have them delivered to Cleveland.
So suddenly you had witnesses against Topalian.
Right.
You had connections from the explosives to Topalian. What about the weapons?
We were able to develop a number of witnesses that could show Mr. Topalian possessed and in some cases requested certain firearms, and we were able to link those directly to Murad Topalian and place them right in his hands.
But what, if anything, did Topalian do with the weapons? As Elliot crisscrossed the country, one witness led to another. He began to hear unbelievable stories about a large group of people who had formed a network in the 1970s, a network of terrorists which operated throughout Europe and North America.
What did you begin to learn?
I learned that between 1975 and 1985 that there was a number of unsolved bombings. There was a number of unsolved assassinations that took place.
It was a wave of terrorism which swept across Europe and North America during the 70s and 80s, all aimed at Turkish officials and businesses. Armenian groups claimed responsibility for assassinations of Turkish officials in the Netherlands, France, and Canada, as well as bombings in London, Paris, Los Angeles, and New York. But were they connected? Elliot was able to link the explosives from the storage unit with 2 bombings in 1981, one outside the Turkish consulate and another at the convention center in Anaheim, California.
All of a sudden, the explosives in the storage unit have in common explosives that have been used in actual terrorist incidents.
All directed at Turkish individuals.
All directed at Turkish individuals, most, if not all, with Armenian suspects.
Correct.
Armenian extremists at the time claimed responsibility for the attacks, saying they were designed to avenge the millions of Armenians murdered in 1915. Elliot learned that some of the crimes in the U.S. were carried out by the youngest members of that network, many of them teenagers at the time, who were devoted to the Armenian cause.
Every single Armenian witness that I interviewed believed in their hearts and in their minds that the genocide took place and that their cause was legitimate.
These previously classified documents obtained by Dateline show that as early as 1981, the FBI was aware of an underground organization of Armenians, a network in which members anticipated orders to shoot or bomb someone. In a chilling echo of al-Qaeda's tactics, according to Elliot, the witnesses said that many of them were sent to training camps as far away as Beirut, Lebanon. They were taught a variety of skills, including specialized training in how to use guns and explosives, techniques of disguise and infiltration, all useful for staging attacks.
They'd go in and infiltrate Turkish ambassadors' offices. They'd dress up, in some instances, like a Turkish reporter. They'd surveil everything in there and come back and report it back to one person.
Members of the network told Elliot they had used those very skills in a brazen attack 20 years ago at the United Nations. The area around the United Nations is ordinarily quiet on a Sunday afternoon. October 12, 1980 was no different. Only a few strollers out and about. So it wasn't surprising that no one noticed a blue Chevy parked just outside the Turkish mission to the UN, just across from the main headquarters. Inside the car, someone had packed 5 sticks of dynamite. Not much compared to the 100